I'm hoping that almost everything I say will be totally obvious and perhaps even uninteresting. And that's important because, well, the art of philosophy is extracting interesting conclusions from boring premises. And, well, we'll see. Anyway, first about liberalism, which I think is an extremely important general outlook on morals and politics. And we'll state it in terms, in political terms, partly because this is, after all, very much a political topic. But as I point out in my books, concepts in politics and morals are structurally very close to each other. All right, in the first place, it's essential to the idea of liberalism that government is to be devoted exclusively to the good of the governed, not to the good of the rulers. So in this respect, the fundamental contrast is between Plato's character Thrasymachus, who holds that justice is the interest of the stronger party, and the other guys, the good guys, as it were. And of course, we all agree with the good guys against Thrasymachus, don't we? All right. And then secondly, and more importantly, what defines liberalism as distinct from what I will very loosely call conservatism. There's not a very good word for it, but it will do. The difference between the two is, well, who or what decides what's good? Obviously, that becomes a paramount question. If you think that government is to be devoted to the good of the people, then what's good for them becomes crucial. Liberalism's answer is that what's good for you is decided by you, not by somebody else. So what's good is determined by the governed, and in effect it means we govern in the interests or in order to promote the desires or wants of the governed, rather than what's good for them by some fancy Platonic criterion or something of that sort. And that's a crucial move in politics, in the history of politics, I think, and also of morals, by the way. Now, war is the attempt to achieve political goals by force of arms rather than cooperation. So war is an attempt to coerce some other party into doing things your way. It's easy enough to define winning in a general formal way, because whenever there's this kind of a conflict, the people who direct it militarily must have in mind something, which is what they're fighting for, what they're trying to achieve. And so winning is achieving it, and not winning is losing it is not achieving it. So far, so good. In war, of course, the military serves political ends, which distinguishes it supposedly from the actions of a gang of robbers. Military victories are essentially means to those political ends, whatever they are. Now, war is, of course, has also been said correctly to be a contest of wills. However, with the difference between war and, for example, sports, that the right to life is suspended for the selected enemy. So it is a contest of wills where coercion is definitive, in the sense of can terminate the lives of the people on the other side. And the question is, when a state embraces liberalism, what can justify that? Now, in what we might call the bad old days, and it isn't clear that they're entirely over yet, war, I think, is essentially grand larceny. We attack or defend the people who occupy some desired territory. Generally speaking, the larceny's object is territory, although often other things too. So the idea is you take the enemy's territory, you take his stuff, you enslave or kill the inhabitants, and perhaps you included in your war goals might be the conversion of the other side to some religion or other ideology. Anyway, the idea the idea is when you win, you end up in control of some real estate and that sort of thing. And with the enemy, in the words of my friend Paul Viminitz, who alas couldn't be here, with the enemy dead or in chains, preferably, by the way, in chains, because dead he's not as much used to as in chains. Larceny is obviously not for the common good. It's one party's good at the expense of another's. When I talk about common good, I mean goods such that possession of it by one person is compatible with possession of it by others. Common good has to be characterized by the absence of local conflicts among the goods. Now, this is not to say that there's not competition. It is to say, I mean, for example, in the case of market competition, that the competition is limited. And it's limited, well, we'll talk more about that in a moment. Now, I propose that liberty, on the liberal view, turns out to be the definitive common good. Everyone to respect everybody else's, and that means nobody aggresses. I mean, the rule against aggression is absolutely fundamental. So the regime, moral and political regime, of respecting people's rights, and in particular their property rights, this, I hold, is a common good. Now, lots of people deny this, and many, many pages have been expended by myself and others discussing this matter. Here, I'm going to almost just lay it down, but no doubt we'll get back to this. Now, oh, I pushed the wrong button here. Property. Yeah. As I say, the bad old days character really featured war as larceny, and I claim that larceny is not for the common good. And I claim that the regime of respecting property rights, which I claim is a part of the general recognition of the basic right for all of liberty, is a common good. Actually, you could make it out, as Locke did, that it is the common good. Property to be established by free occupancy and not force of arms. Once the property rights are established, then we proceed by free exchange, not by larceny. And property holdings constitute the baseline for these exchanges. You've got something, I've got something. Our exchanges are free in the sense that each party has to agree, and you will agree by contemplating the difference between what you've got now and what you will have as a result of the exchange. And both parties have to agree. That's what makes exchange free exchange, and thus exemplifies the general right of liberty. I also point out that your right to yourself, which of course is the basic right, and when we talk about a right to life, we're saying that it's your life is yours. Other people don't get to take it from you without your consent, and that includes living your life the way you want to live it, insofar as that's compatible with other people doing likewise. So the right to oneself is established by free occupancy, namely by just being born. You're born in possession of yourself, and nothing more is needed to establish legitimacy of ownership of the self. So, from the general right of self-ownership, of course, I say of course, but again, there's been a fair amount of argument about this subject, come the appropriate civil and economic rights. Now, against all this background, which is the common stuff of liberalism, is, or of course should be, the question is, what could justify suspension of someone's right to life, anyhow? And the answer would have to be that only the second person's known intention to violate someone yet else's right. That is, we only can use lethal methods of dealing with somebody when we know that that person is attacking innocent persons who have not done something to deserve this. And so the only thing that justifies this kind of intervention is defense. Now, I said forcible intervention in general, but when it comes to war, of course, the ultimate one is killing. All right. Now, War. Well, wars all occur in time, and somebody has to aggress to get them started. That is, if we operate on my general presumption of property rights all around, then we have boundary lines, and then it's clear that in order for a war to begin, somebody must cross somebody else's property line. Somebody must get it started by an act of what amounts to aggression. If there's no initiation of force by anyone, then of course there can be no defensive action either. No aggression, no defense. So the result of this is that from the point of view of liberalism, war is essentially illegitimate. Somebody has to be violating somebody else's rights. And in principle, then, at least, we should always be able to establish who's the guilty party. And so war should always be, strictly speaking, unnecessary. That is, unnecessary provided that we all acknowledge and respect other people's rights. Now, the person whose right is to be violated is, of course, entitled to defend himself. That's another inference from the general principle of liberty. Of course, as Locke and others have held, he might not be able to defend himself. He might want to enlist assistance in this, and others may assist him in that endeavor if they are voluntarily enlisted. So I can help you provided you want to be helped, and provided I'm helping you in a legitimate respect, which is defending yourself from attack. Note that others are not required to assist the person in question. They are permitted to assist him. Defense is fundamentally a negative right. So now, winning in war formally is achieved when whatever is the politically controlled military undertaking's aim in employing its military forces is achieved. And for liberalism, there is only one such aim, and that's peace. It is not legitimate to make war on people for any other purpose than defense, hence peace, because peace is simply the absence of war. Now, a point about war is, as we might say, existential. If somebody is determined to commit violence against somebody else, that person's options are now severely limited. He can, A, attempt to persuade the would-be aggressor to back down, B, he can defend himself by force, or C, he can not resist and effectively allow the aggressor to have his way, which probably means, in effect, suicidal. Liberal governments prefer these in that order. A is better than B, if possible, and B, of course, is preferable to C, except in very rare cases. Now, a possible war might be averted by a mutual realization that doesn't make any sense, and thus a mutual avoidance of hostilities. And when that happens, should we say that both sides have won? Well, of course, there hasn't been a war, so in that sense, the concept of winning is inapplicable. But in terms of the exchange between people, which could have eventuated in war, then I want to say, and I think we want to say, that both sides have won in the only relevant sense of that term here, in the sense of achieving the only legitimate aim that the war could have without any bloodshed. Well, but as I say, if A fails, if we can't use persuasion, then we have to worry about war, and C is essentially normally not an option. So the war aims, from the point of view of liberalism, are really very simple, and that is we should move to the maximally rights-respecting possible peace. Now, all war, as various pundits have observed, Grotius, for example, aim at peace. The whole point of war is to achieve a peace, which is, from the point of view of the people making war, a preferable state of affairs. From the point of view of the person who initiated the war, a preferable state of affairs to the condition that obtained prior to the beginning of the war. He's unhappy with that. The new peace is better than the old peace in his view. But the liberal's only real criterion for evaluating peaces is respect for each other's rights. That's really all that matters from the political and moral point of view. Hence, the maximally rights-respecting possible peace. I believe that from this, some of Kant's conditions would be deducible. I mean, for example, you can't have a treaty that as Kant puts it, contains the seeds of future conflict. If you could have another treaty that didn't do that and that respected the situations of everybody, that would be better. So roughly, that's what I have in mind by a maximally rights-respecting possible peace. As a long line of just war theorists insist, then, a just peace is the proper aim of war. And winning a war, now, from this point of view, is ideally bringing about a condition in which further war is unnecessary. Now, I would mention, I mean, as I think a lot of us would, as sort of paradigmatically ideal cases of the termination of war, the end of World War II as regards both Japan and Germany, the major Axis culprits. Well, after World War II, the imprisoned soldiers on both sides, or I mean, of both Germany and Japan, were not imprisoned very long. They were not enchained or slaughtered. They, along with the remaining civilians, soon reverted to peacetime normal, with full independence and future preference for peace deeply ingrained. And I think it can hardly be denied that the terminations of World War II was utterly and remarkably successful in that respect. Japan and Germany are two of the most peace-respecting liberal countries in the world, and they are also very prosperous. And this, I think, is definitive. Well, so now, I mean, this has all been on the presumption of liberalism, and the real question is, why be liberal? I mean, why should we accept the constraints of liberalism? And that is a deep and a very important question. And I part company with Kant, for example, in not allowing as an answer recourse to some kind of transcendental gimmicks. We have to argue for liberalism on the basis of plain old rational decision theoretic reasoning. Now, with war, of course, somebody has to lose, and with peace, I want to claim everybody wins. And this is prima facie an advantage of liberal peace, if the claim about it is right. Is it? Now, we'll say, I mean, I don't put up any graphs on game theory, but I'm taking it that the situation of war, generally speaking, can be characterized as a prisoner's dilemma. Each side thinks in the war that winning is best, each prefers peace to losing, and each one's effort to win motivates defense by the other, which makes for war, which makes it worse for both of us than peace. Mutual peace is better than mutual war from both points of view. And so we will only have war if somebody makes a mistake. War as strategy requires that somebody has goofed. Somebody at the outset of the war made an estimate that he or she could win. Maybe both sides did, and at least one of them must have been wrong. Now, I add that, I mean, I think there's a background, very, very important, maybe dominating condition about this, and that's technological. As history has progressed, military technology has progressed, and generally speaking, the winning side had better technology than the losing side, with moderate exceptions, but by and large, when the war is pursued by somebody with superior technology, the other person has either got to catch up with technology or he's going to lose. And there's also a general tendency for the technology to be expensive, and this is rather important. Because what we want now, when I've said that the situation of war presents itself as a prisoner's dilemma, it doesn't just do so. It does so only if neither side can be can plausibly estimate that he could gain from fighting that war. And what I'm claiming is that as history goes along, the plausibility of this tends toward zero. So what we hope is the case, and what I think is the case, is that due antecedently with war, everybody loses. Now, how do we show this? Well, I'm going to divide the kinds of wars that are fought into two. One is, broadly speaking, economic. I won't try to define that very precisely, but certainly the realm of economics is the realm in which we can have free exchange, free trade. And if the purpose of war is economic, then a very fundamentally important consideration here is that war is irrational. That anything you can do with war, you can do better by trade. Now, back in the bad old days, that I think wasn't true. Tribes, nations, etc., could indeed hope to better their situations by going out and conquering some other people and taking their stuff. They could come back richer despite the people who have lost their lives in the process. And I want to argue that that's no longer true, that war is now so expensive that it's silly to think that you could do better by taking it from somebody else by force than by buying it from him. And the great thing about the market is it's peaceable, and it enables you to buy absolutely anything that people are willing to sell. And they, of course, will sell it if the price is right. So those who gain in war do so at the expense of others, whereas in peace, nobody proceeds in that sense at the expense of others. Now, that's something that can be defined more precisely, and we will talk about that. I also point out that, after all, investment in war is essentially useless. You don't gain anything by having a whole bunch of tanks and bombs and shells lying around. Anybody any good except only as instruments of war itself. And if you don't have any wars to fight and no prospect of them, investment of that sort of thing would be a waste of money. And a waste of money, I might point out, by the state is what we're talking about here. And it is fundamental to liberalism, remember, definitive of liberalism, that the state is interested in the well-being of its people as defined by those people. And that includes not wasting their money, not spending money on things that the people wouldn't have wanted to buy if they had their choice. And so, an investment by a nation in the instruments of war, when it doesn't really need it for defensive purposes, is not only, it's expensive and it's wrong. It's something that states ought not to be doing from the liberal point of view. Now, all this, I want to say, following the intuition of Kant, makes wars between developed states. Now, I've said developed states, but of course, there is the question whether they have to be, in Kant's terms, republics, something like democracies for this condition to hold true. Now, I'm hoping not, but that's an important question. At any rate, wars between developed states that are also developed politically, and generally speaking, most of the developed states nowadays are politically more or less liberal, is such that war between them is very unlikely. Will there be war between Canada and Norway anytime in the foreseeable future? No. Probably not, but essentially no. The probability is close to zero. And that's true, I think, generally speaking, of democracy generally. And that is because anything that they might want to do in relation to each other can be done by the means of free exchange, so that war is stupid from the point of view of each of them. The other general purpose of war would be, I will very broadly say, ideological. And here we're on a different kind of ground. Now, my favorite kind of ideology is religious, for a reason. One might say, well, but how about trying to force other nations to become democratic? And I agree that that's a special problematic case. But I might point out that trying to get other nations to be democratic that weren't before from the liberal point of view, is a move in the direction of ensuring future peace, and so there's a point to it. Whereas, if what you're trying to do is to force them to adopt your religion, that's quite another matter. Because religion cannot be, the enforcement of a religion on somebody else cannot be part of the common good. Now, people who try to do this deny this. They claim, well, but my religion is true, therefore everybody adopting it would be good for them. They'll all, whatever, go to heaven or something like that. And the trouble with that is that you've abandoned political liberalism when you say that, because the people you're talking to don't agree about this. The whole point is they think some other religion is the basic truth. And then you run up against the problem that there's no way to prove it to them. Now, the claim that it's unprovable is partly empirical. Just try it any time and see where you get in trying to convert somebody by reasoning to some other religion. It's basically not empirical. I mean, religion is such a thing that it inherently cannot be proven, and I think that is a major part. In fact, I think it's an essential part of its appeal, if you want to call it appeal. That is, the people who fight under the banner of a religion know that what they're talking about cannot be proven, and yet I know that my Redeemer liveth, etc. They have no, unquote, know that it's true. And therefore, all these guys up here must be evil because they're not adopting it. And so the only thing to do is kill them. And of course, that's what they think about you, and hence we have the 30 Years' War. And in the West, it only took the 30 Years' War and a bit else to make people realize the vastly superior wisdom from the point of view of politics and morals of religious tolerance. And so a number one plank in the liberal platform is religious freedom. And there are other things that belong in the same ambit. I mean, roughly speaking, freedom of lifestyle, where the lifestyle does not itself require or entail any sort of impingement on other people's interests necessarily, is all part of the game. So general liberal civic rights, civic freedoms is part of this program. And that's I think, the number one requirement in today's world in terms of the worry about jihadi and so forth. They have not seen the point. Well, we'll get to that again. So religions are intrinsically intractable, and therefore we must not have religious wars. Those are absolutely ruled out in the liberal program. All right, now then there are asymmetric wars. We want to worry about that, where one side is immensely superior in conventional terms, and the question is, well, why do they happen, for one thing? We have two kinds of asymmetric wars here. One exemplified by the first Gulf War. I mean, that was a very interesting case because this was a case of a genuinely conventional war, except that the Allies, the Americans especially, technology was enormously superior to that of the Iraqis. And the statistics are, kind of sobering. I mean, I don't spell them out in the slides here, but roughly the Iraqi army lost about 4,000 tanks, and the Allies lost somewhere around 4. I don't mean 400 or 4,000, but 4. And the casualties, there were something like 150,000 Iraqi soldiers, casualties, and there were something like 250 Americans, most of whom were succumbed to accidents rather than to enemy fire, and so on. So if you have asymmetric conventional wars, well, the smaller party is just asking to get get tromped on, and that's that. So conventional, genuine asymmetric wars are very, very unlikely. But then there are the non-conventional ones. A footnote, conventional wars between little tiny states is another exception which we can talk a little bit about. The main point here is, why do the larger states tolerate them? And roughly the answer is, well, because they don't have all that big an interest in them, or think they don't, and because they would be too expensive. The example of Rwanda, which was discussed, is a very interesting one. It wasn't exactly a war, although it will do, Why didn't the other nations intervene? Well, partly because the citizens in the various countries involved weren't very enthusiastic about endangering the lives of their kids in a situation like that, and partly because they didn't have their act together. Well, we all know. But at any rate, conventional wars are not very interesting. I mean, from the point of view of world peace, it's a question of large nations deciding whether they're worth bothering with, and we can think in the long run that they're not likely to happen very much, and maybe in the future not at all. And conventional wars between large states are the ones that I'm claiming are essentially ruled out by economic considerations, in the sense that they're just completely pointless. But the asymmetric wars of the type that are going on now, the so-called war on terrorism, for example, those are a real problem. And what makes them a real problem? Well, the non-conventional war players are able to proceed because, firstly, they tolerate very high casualty rates, and they even glory in them. What's more, they don't mind collateral damage, including on their own side. I mean, most damage, most lives lost among for example, people in Muslim countries in the jihadi things are at the hands of their fellow Muslims, not at the hands of intervening allied troops. They mostly don't occupy territory, not until their enemies show weakness, and not until the chance develops. Otherwise, they fight in the mists, and among population. So, and they're fanatics. I mean, because they're proceeding on these ideological premises. And so that leaves us two options, basically, like the same two options. Either we try to persuade them that their ideology is way off base, or somehow we manage to exterminate them, or enough of them so that the rest of them decide it isn't worth bothering with, which is unlikely given their fanaticism. Both of these, of course, are very, very difficult. I'm almost through, if that's what you mean.
It's okay.
So the first has the problem that the enemy won't listen. That's the trouble with fanatics. I might add that I believe it's that they won't listen. It isn't that if they did listen, you wouldn't be able to persuade them of the problems with their point of view. I think you can, but the problem is getting them to talk, which is almost impossible. So I don't think it's that discussion of these matters is essentially intractable. What's intractable is this the right religion? But that's not the subject. I mean, the thing that you persuade the jihadi of is you're talking about the wrong thing. Let's table that issue because there's no way to reach agreement on that. The question is the attempt to, is the practice of threatening to kill other people because they don't agree with you in religion something that you should be engaging in? Is that something you have any business doing? And that's what I think we can persuade them that the answer to is no, if we could only talk with them, but we can't. As to the other option, well, that's very much a matter of military technology, plus, of course, the liberal reluctance, which is absolutely justified in collateral damage. So once you've got a strong aversion to collateral damage, and you've got an enemy which is both fanatical and doesn't mind killing lots and lots of other people of any sort, then you've got a big problem on your hands, and the technology you need to deal with definitively is very exotic, and probably as time goes on, we can hope that there will be improvement on that, and there isn't much choice about what to do. You have to try. So, to revert to our general question, what does it mean to win a war? Now, this is a war with, a question with two interpretations. One is, what does it mean to say that somebody has won? How do we define the term victory? That seems to me to be not a very great problem. But the other is not the meaning of, quote, war, but rather the meaning of war itself. That is, what is the significance of war and of victory in war? And here, it seems to me that the liberal answer is the right one. It's restoration of a good peace, a stable, reliable peace with people on the way to prosperity, all of them. And all we can say about this is good luck. And there I quit.